Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Prophetic Leadership and Visionary Hope, New Essays on the Work of Cornel West. Edited by Barbara Will. Narrated by Deanna Anthony. Introduction. Cruciform, almost all the way down. Barbara Will. The object of inquiry for Afro-American critical thought, Cornel West wrote in 1982, is how to build its language in such a way that the configurations of sentences and the constellation of paragraphs themselves create a textuality and distinctive discourse which are a material force for Afro-American freedom. One can imagine few more illustrious practitioners of this distinctive discourse than Cornel West himself, whose own sentences and paragraphs over the course of a prolific half-century of writing and speaking have sought in the most inclusive way to articulate the force of African-American mattering. Mattering, in a sense of being significant, visible, or legible, of having political weight and bearing, but also proleptically, in the sense of imagining beyond, of envisioning alternative futures and trajectories for Black Americans and their communities, and indeed, Americans of every racial and ethnic background. Articulating how and why Black Lives Matter is for Cornel West both a political and a prophetic project, equally tied to ongoing pragmatic movements of social justice and ongoing predictive forms of revolutionary critique. It is a project oriented towards exposing injustices, highlighting hypocrisies and shop-worn pieties, and celebrating achievements. And it is fundamentally a project of language, of opening minds and hearts through words, of making discourse into a material force for the betterment of all. One of America's preeminent public intellectuals, Cornel West is the author or editor of more than 30 books on subjects ranging from the philosophy of pragmatism to the challenges of multiculturalism to the cultural politics of difference. With teaching appointments at Princeton, Harvard, Yale, Dartmouth, and Union Theological Seminary, West is also a sought-after colleague, an inspiring mentor and teacher, and a celebrated speaker whose capacity to move audiences through compassionate critique and courageous dialogue is legendary. Few living American intellectuals are so capable of straddling the divide between academic and public. No stranger to controversy, West and his work pose provocative questions in order to promote understanding and action, and always to offer a measure of hope and optimism. Described by Marian Wright Edelman as one of the most authentic, brilliant, prophetic, and healing voices in America today, West holds a unique and cherished position. Alongside such prophetic voices as W.E.B. Du Bois, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Abraham Joshua Heschel, and Audre Lorde, among so many others, in continually reminding us of the urgent place of racial justice in the unfinished and fragile project of American democracy. The text at the heart of the present volume is West's Race Matters, a slim collection of essays that had a profound and immediate impact on contemporary political discussions on race in America when it appeared in 1993. Part philosophical inquiry, part trenchant sociological analysis, part personal meditation on his own experience with racism during the waning years of the 20th century, West's book put into words the dreams and frustrations of the post-civil rights era. Published in the wake of the Los Angeles riots of 1992 and the police beating of Rodney King, an event painfully resonant to this day, that laid bare the rage and fury of communities unwilling to countenance unchecked forms of police brutality. Race Matters also spoke viscerally to its immediate historical moment. Like the murder of George Floyd in the summer of 2020, the King beating, and the subsequent acquittal of the 4 police perpetrators who brutally struck Mr. King 56 times, gave rise to a nationwide collective moment of anger and unrest, what West called justified social rage, toward the sense of powerlessness in American society, on the part of a wide, multiracial, and trans-class swath of the population. When Los Angeles burned, West wrote, and out of his sense of outrage and despair emerged one of the most moving and wide-ranging essays of his career, Learning to Talk of Race, published in the New York Times Magazine in August 1992. Learning to Talk of Race was not a departure from what West had been saying all along, in smaller venues, classrooms, and on book tours. But it was the first time West had so clearly articulated, in the pages of a major newspaper, the stakes of America's racial and democratic calculus for a wide audience. The first time that West so publicly took aim at not only the broken promises and structural inequities that defined Black life in the early 1990s, but also a culture of hedonistic self-indulgence and narcissistic self-regard that both bisected and transcended race matters, and that had led to a deeply American spiritual impoverishment or sense of nihilism. Learning to Talk of Race became the introduction for Race Matters and the immediate catalyst for the book's publication. It marked the consolidation of an inescapably powerful public voice with a unique ability to speak across classes and registers in the search for a common, morally stringent prophetic activism. While Learning to Talk of Race turned up the volume on West's voice as a public intellectual, the majority of the chapters in Race Matters had been published elsewhere in the late 1980s and early 1990s. For years, indeed, West had been writing about a larger set of ongoing issues around Black life in America. The challenge of leadership in a culture marked by the legacy of white supremacy, the limited value of liberal affirmative action programs in promoting the affirmation of Black humanity, the dangerous seductions of African American conservatism, and the questions of Black self-regard, what West called Black nihilism, the necessity and difficulty of cross-race solidarity and cross-religious affinity, the need to channel legitimate Black rage over untenable conditions of existence into productive opportunities and viewpoints. The 7 discrete essays that dealt with these concerns found clear and lyrical connection when placed side by side in the pages of West's volume. Moreover, a new chapter, Black Sexuality, the Taboo Subject, dealt squarely with the taboo centrality of the persistent, transgenerational, and toxic myths about Black sexuality for both men and women in this country. Its inclusion in the volume, as West has noted, was necessary to provide the full dimension of the Black experience in America. Compelling and accessible, laced with personal insight, Race Matters is still one of those rare books that speaks to all. A graduate student in 1993, I remember hearing about this must-read book from my academic friends, but also from countless others outside the university walls. Race Matters soon became a bestseller, lauded for its ferocious moral vision and astute intellect, as for its ability to discern synthesis where others see only chaos and inspire hope in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. The book page of the Washington Post praised the intellectual West for keeping it real. West understands that ideas cannot be separated from morality and the realities of daily life. Nevertheless, the difficult balancing act West strove for in this book between accessible ideas and intellectual rigor was not universally appreciated. Dissenting opinion struggled with the thinness of West's prescriptions for future action, wishing for less diagnosis and more concrete solutions. Others demanded more pointed analysis of the interrelations between market mechanisms and white supremacy, which West, particularly in his analysis of Black nihilism, gestures at but never pins down. Even the New York Times lamented some of the book's platitudes about matters like freedom, democracy, and equality. Almost none of his critics paid attention to the prophetic or Christian resonances behind West's stylistic injunctions and formulations. In the end, Race Matters' easy style and readability belie deeper achievements. The book's erudition, rigorous argument, and cross-hatching connections across matters of race, class, sexuality, gender, religion, politics, and nationality established a new standard for what we now call the public humanities. and the text has only become richer and more relevant to the contemporary moment with each new rereading. Some 25 years later, well into a new century and at the dawn of a new millennium, West's provocative analysis of American democracy, inextricably tethered to racial conflict and enduring white racism against peoples of color, has not lost its critical edge. Indeed, new threats and new hopes have made this analysis even more urgent today. The supposedly post-racial era of Barack Obama has given way to the white supremacist sloganeering of Charlottesville. The mass incarceration of African Americans at levels unprecedented in American society has created, in the words of Michelle Alexander, a new Jim Crow. And the movement for Black lives, born into social media through the efforts of 3 young female activists, has animated a new generation to challenge the complacency of a supposedly colorblind society. Race Matters, and its subsequent companion volume, Democracy Matters, have served as the key building blocks for understanding the dimensions of these changes in a contemporary moment of struggle, dissension, and debate. In the summer of 2018, a group of critics, historians, theologians, and philosophers of race came together at Dartmouth College to celebrate the 25th anniversary republication of Race Matters and to ponder anew the questions West's work raises. The 3-day event encouraged participants to think broadly about how West's book shaped their development, to place the work within an intellectual genealogy, and to explore its prophetic promise on the horizon of countervailing intellectual currents of the day, such as Afro-pessimism. The event also featured the work of such important and emerging Black artists as Daniel Bernard Roman, Lisa Armstrong, Enrico Riley, and 2 extraordinary Dartmouth students, Tobele Mawewera and Raleigh Nesbitt, to create a memorable weekend of critique, collaboration, and celebration that brought hundreds of participants to Hanover, New Hampshire. As we gathered to reflect on the significance of Race Matters, invited contributors from various academic fields used this occasion as a multidisciplinary, generative moment to speak both to the text at hand and to the larger issues it raises in the present day. The resulting essays included here offer a wide-ranging account of what Saidiya Hartman calls the poetics of hope and despair, embedded both in Race Matters and in the particular moment of 21st century critical and prophetic race theory. Given the recent resurgence of racist and xenophobic rhetoric in the political sphere, and the continued economic downward mobility of large swaths of American society, as well as the particular havoc wreaked on communities of color by the COVID-19 pandemic, it is not surprising that many of the essays gathered here focus their attention on West's analysis of Black nihilism and the empty promises of political conservatism for persons of color. These are topics that speak directly to the ongoing sense of frustration and helplessness engendered by the national elections of 2016 and the tragic deaths at the hands of police of yet another generation of Black citizens, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others. At the same time, many also question the binaryism of nihilistic thinking and its potential, ironically, to affirm the very impasse of which it is the critique. The essays in the present volume follow West in refusing to remain in a static or unyielding intellectual orientation, even in the face of deep critical pessimism toward the currents of market-driven neoliberal individualism that continue to dominate 21st century American culture. The methodology employed in these essays is one of critical movement and creative imagining through a strong allegiance to the power of language to shape understanding and possibility within non-mainstream communities. The voices collected here are faithful to West's own injunction that courageous thinking requires conceptualizing, feeling, and writing with hope despite being fully cognizant of the manifold difficulties embedded in this position. They see their interventions as part of a project of creating a material force for Afro-American freedom. This is not to deny the fundamental methodological challenge faced by our writers in addressing and conveying The unique expressive fluency and crystalline clarity of West's most trenchant work, capturing and framing the transformative power of West's own words to the present day, requires an ability to think on many different registers at once. There is, first of all, the intellectual tradition within which West is speaking, a tradition that extends back to Plato and weaves through a rich panoply of modern thinkers, from Douglas to Du Bois, to Dewey to Hamer to Rukeyser, up to, with great propulsive energy, Martin Luther King Jr. West draws on this vast legacy through multiple acts of intellectual fidelity, both spoken and implicit, inviting his audience on the excitement of this journey as he shares what he calls paideia, deep education. Tethered to this intellectual commitment is West's interest in prophecy, in a multi-strand theological tradition that includes Western religious prophets as well as literary, musical, and comic prophets. For West, the prophetic tradition offers the fullest response to the existential dread of modern life. It is a form of witnessing to disenfranchisement, to the false promises and pieties of modernity, and to the continuance of human suffering despite modern progress. It is also an ethical and political stance, rooted in an ongoing search for religious freedom and salvation. Prophetic pragmatism, what Susanna Heschel describes as a new path of politics in a religious key, is Cornel West's calling card. Following and flowering out of West's prophetic stance is, finally, his unremitting and capacious critique of social injustice, his refusal to rest with the status quo, his understanding of the urgency of speaking truth to power now, clearly and forcefully, with not a moment to lose. West's Gramscian commitment to intellectual activism embedded in community practice is not unique, of course, but particularly potent in its connection to prophecy and hope. Each of the contributors in this volume works to capture one or more of these strands of Cornel West's work, while also striving to create distinctions and differences within the legacy that West has forged. While foundational to contemporary African American critical and political thought, West's work is not scripture. Its commitment to a distinctive discourse is also a commitment to dialogue and debate within the framework of mutual respect, intellectual humility, and what West calls a love ethic. Such a commitment or call encourages a strong response. The contributors here write in the spirit of revenance, continually returning to an text that remains haunting and grounding at once, while also departing in critical ways from certain arguments, assumptions, and implied consequences of the terms of race matters. Most of the existing scholarship on West's work concentrates on the philosophical, theological, and political frameworks within which he stages his interventions. Among these, the meticulous and probing volumes of essays edited by George Yancey, Cornel West, A Critical Reader, 2001, remains exemplary in its careful explication of key themes in West's writing, including the role of pragmatism and existentialism in his conceptual foundation. The definition of Black nihilism as either decadence or negative possibility, the sometimes incommensurable tension between philosophical and prophetic worldviews in West's writings, and the particular constraints and pressures of being an African American public intellectual. It also must be noted that Yancey's was the first book in U.S. history to engage in its entirety with the work of a living Black American philosopher. The present volume does not sidestep the analyses of Yancey and his contributors, but adds to them through a particular focus on race matters and its prescient insight into American culture during the turbulent years that followed its publication, particularly the first 2 decades of the 21st century. Reading West across that particular span of time renews one's appreciation for his unwavering commitment to critique as engagement, to writing as a form of inclusion, to speaking as a protestation of what he calls democratic faith. Years marked by the deadliest terrorist attacks on American soil, the longest war in American history, unprecedented income inequality, the first African American president in U.S. history, and the rise of a resurgent and racist right have only sharpened the urgency of West's message in Race Matters. We either hang together by combating these forces that divide and degrade us, or we hang separately. The contributors to the present volume recognize that ours is a bleak time of spiritual blackout and imperial meltdown, as West writes in the new introduction for the 25th anniversary edition of Race Matters. Nevertheless, their voices seek, in the consistently critical and also hopeful mode of West himself, to put a premium on courageous truth-telling and exemplary action. This engagement is mobilized through varying critical models in the sections that follow. Organized thematically, each section offers a key point of entry into West's life and work, his deep embeddedness in Black American intellectual traditions, his equally strong allegiance to movements of Black spirituality, his unceasing commitments to social justice movements across many registers and regions. This thematic organization enables critical depth to be brought to bear on specific issues generated by Race Matters, or, more generally, by West's own capacious oeuvre and activism as an organic intellectual. At the same time, these specific points of entry traverse one another in crucial ways, and are shot through with common motifs. For example, West's searing critique of American racial capitalism, his profound belief in the idea of democracy, and his lyrical invocation of the power of music and literature to secure hope and foster social change. Moreover, given the wide intellectual scope of Race Matters and West's own inclusive and capacious discursive fluency, any interpretive apparatus must perforce reject stark distinctions among intellectual, spiritual, and activist engagements. Notable for the wide-ranging expertise each author brings to her or his analysis, and for the manifold subjects covered across the essays: politics, religion, gender, class, ethnicity, music, literature, education, and the media. This volume seeks to be as comprehensive and inclusive as the figure around whom it centers, Cornel West himself. Part 1 considers the intellectual genealogy of Race Matters through the light of figures central to that text's aim and genesis: James Baldwin, Malcolm X, and W.E.B. Du Bois. In Chapter 1, Paul Beauvais offers a wide-ranging account of sources central to the model of loving critique promoted by West in Race Matters, including Baldwin and Malcolm. Referring to West's central concept of a politics of conversion, Beauvais traces the lines of connection between this concept and a radical critical tradition steeped in activism, engagement, and an organic connection to communities and movements, a proper criticism rather than a persistent criticism. Just as Baldwin, Malcolm, Du Bois, and others in West's lineage seek to carve out a politics that rises above race exclusiveness, rage, and anger, so too does Race Matters outline the ideal qualities of Black leadership cited in an ethical politics of love, a criticism of resistance and inclusion, and a deep investment in the prophetic tradition. In Chapter 2, Lucius T. Outlaw Jr. probes West's complicated, even fraught, relationship with the career and legacies of Du Bois, a figure West himself described as the brook of fire through which we must all pass in order to gain access to the intellectual and political weaponry needed to sustain the radical democratic tradition in our time. Outlaw's essay makes it clear that the trajectory Race Matters set in motion for West was precisely that of wrestling with Du Bois, a project that initially misses, to Outlaw's mind, a central interrogation with Du Boisian terms of Black peoplehood. For Outlaw, Race Matters is a major, learned, creatively insightful, but not always successful, counterpoint to the work of Du Bois, a masterful statement of a major public intellectual that nevertheless fails to move forward key insights that Du Bois pioneered decades earlier. Part 2 engages directly with nihilism in Black America, one of West's most important and most controversial chapters in Race Matters, where West in 1993 called for his readers to face up to the monumental eclipse of hope, the unprecedented collapse of meaning, the incredible disregard for human, especially Black, life and property in much of Black America. His words occasioned a strenuous debate over agency, victimhood, and the structural conditions of existence for contemporary African Americans. In an essay that serves as a bridge between parts 1 and 2, Brandon Terry, Chapter 3, asks how West's attention to this eclipse of hope, in fact, places him in an important lineage of pessimism that extends from Arthur Schopenhauer and Friedrich Nietzsche through W.E.B. Du Bois and up to Walter Benjamin and Hannah Arendt. Terry then draws this debate forward into contemporary debates over Afro-pessimism, an intellectual movement that theorizes the impossibility of any project of Black political engagement or social renewal as futile, naive, and always already doomed by and within the unremitting racist mandates of white supremacist American culture. Alongside nihilistic trends within African American expressive culture, Afro-pessimism, Terry writes, underscores the historical failure of progressivist movements in the 20th century to erase the legacy of slavery or accommodate a transformative vision of egalitarian racial difference. Yet, like West, Terry refuses to rest with the Afro-pessimist worldview in its totalizing sweep. Terry sees this worldview as insufficiently attentive to multiple, semi-autonomous strands of oppression that complicate and in some ways resist the conflation of experience into a single totality, thereby sublating the meaning of Black struggle and striving into the ironic language of non-events. For Terry, West's tragic sensibility offers a much more powerful mode of critique that locates within failed moments of historical possibility the seeds of future action and social renewal. This sensibility, Terry writes simply, is a mode of keeping faith. The faith-keeping and prophesying that powerfully lifts up the pages of Race Matters and serves as an antidote to nihilism is the subject of Chapter 4. There, Andrew Prevost analyzes West's investment in a politics of love and conversion as offering a new perspective on the idea of Black nihilism, in a theological tradition that extends back to the medieval Christian mystic Marguerite Porete. West courageously calls out the humanization of people's denied presence and visibility, or subjectivity, the ironic subjects of nihilistic thinking. Reading West via Prevost embraces the idea of conversion as a mode of demonstrating love in the face of nihilism and preventing the foreclosure of the future in favor of a more exalted future of possibility and hope. Prevost's essay brings spiritual depth and intellectual rigor to the position of the love warrior. As West himself has written, the mark of the prophet is to speak the truth in love with courage, come what may. Susanna Heschel's What Manner of Man is the Prophet? Cornel West in the Hebrew Prophets, Chapter 5, tracks the strong ties between West's theology and philosophy and that of the Hebrew prophets, including Heschel's own father, Abraham Joshua Heschel. The tradition that Heschel reads in West's work is one of heartfelt solidarity with the wretched of the earth, bearing witness, and a rousing call to justice. Words and acts infused by passion and courage, as well as by a strong artistic tradition of call and response, countering tendencies to pessimism and disavowal through a full-throated, intellectually rigorous blues cry. West speaks with the spirit of a Hasidic Rebbe. West, like the Hebrew prophets, is a prophetic figure who condemns disavowal, denounces indifference, and proclaims that God is never unmoved but suffers with us. The counter-theological dimensions of the prophet's position may be at odds with liberal Protestant tendencies, as well as with market-driven capitalist ideologies and techno-messianic futurity that dictate shallow individualistic wants and desires. Nevertheless, thanks to such figures as West, James Baldwin, Martin Luther King, and Abraham Joshua Heschel, the ethical imperative to justice remains strong in this country and offers the best possible antidote to more oppressive and vicious modes of social functioning. As a fitting close to this discussion of nihilism and prophetic activism, Nkosi Anderson, in Chapter 6, offers a new reading of West's relationships to Black prophetic Christian tradition as seen through the social justice heritage of the Black.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?